punched in our home number and held it to my ear. My wife wakes up upstairs and I said, the FBI is at the end of the road. They've arrested me. And why? Of course, you can imagine the question. I said, I have no idea. I don't know what this is about. My life as I knew it ended that day. My children are the most important thing in my life. My schedule was I got up very, very early before daylight, and I would go in the office and get my work done so I could be there in the afternoons for John. And he and I would go spearfishing, or his bribe was I had to watch SpongeBob SquarePants with him, and then he would do what I wanted to do. So we'd ride bikes or do whatever, but John was the focus of my life, and I thoroughly enjoyed those days, but again, they came to a crashing halt. Our business back in those days was in the financial services industry. We were operating in several nations, and most of our clients were international. We did have a few American clients, a couple of them being North Carolina politicians and a judge, U.S. attorney, North Carolina Republican chairman Samuel T. Curran, and his clients, and they had opened some accounts with our trust firm, and we could not get them to give us the source of funds information. So I guess that was the genesis of all this. I filed a suspicious activity report with the Central Bank of the Bahamas and said we can't get source of funds. We've advised these people to move their business elsewhere. 2 years later, was asked to come to the United States to meet with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Western North Carolina to discuss a case where they were investigating Mr. Curran and his clients. Agreed to do so, sent them all the information we had. I had no expectations of anything other than going to Charlotte, answering a few questions, helping them. Instead, I'm kidnapped at the end of the road. I left this house where we're sitting now and went out the gate, and I noticed there was a small SUV, and I didn't know who was there. So I drive on through and noticed that they pulled in behind me, and then I get out at the end of the road, and there's a group of cars, and turned out that was our federal government waiting on me. Down the window, and I remember seeing his badge, D. Curran. I said, well, Mr. Curran, I'm supposed to meet you in Charlotte at 10 a.m. And he said, well, we decided to do this a little differently, so they arrested me. The agent said, well, don't you want us to return this car down to your house? What's the code for the gate? And after seeing how they were handling things, I said, well, I don't want to give you any code to the gate. You can leave it at the gate. He said, well, you better call your wife and tell her to meet us there, and then she can take it in. So my wife's asleep upstairs, and I called. He took my own phone and punched in our home number and held it to my ear. And I said, the FBI is at the end of the road. They've arrested me. I don't know what this is about. And I said, but meet them at the gate and they'll give you the keys to the rental car. And so she did. I'm sitting there with my hands behind my back, not having any idea what's going on. And then I see them come up and they just drag my wife out of a car and then throw her in the back of another one with handcuffs and her night clothes. That scene will never leave my mind. The fact that my government would do that to anyone was horrific. I could not believe it. And so I asked the guy, well, what about the kids? They're there at the house asleep. Well, that's not my problem. I've got to get you to an arraignment. These things aren't supposed to happen in America. That's when I asked him, I said, do you have children, Agent Curran? And he hesitated for a minute, and then he said, yes. And I said, well, how would you feel right now if the government kidnapped you and your wife and was willing to leave two little boys, 11 and 12, asleep in a house, not knowing what had been done to their parents? He looked long and hard and thought, and then he said, all right, well, who can I call? I said, well, I guess the chief of police said he'll come take care of them.
I thought I was dreaming. This is not true. I mean, this guy, wildlife commissioner, my best friend, know him as well as a brother. This is wrong. From the beginning. And the kids were just ringing in my head. He was telling me that he left them at home in the bed. And what do you want me to do? What can I do? And he said, well, if you'll come over here and get the kids, we should get this thing resolved after a while because they didn't do anything to it.
They first of all took us in and processed us. They photograph you with your clothes off for tattoos. Processing went on for hours and hours and hours. Then they took us in chains into court before a judge, and that's when you were arraigned. And they read a slate of charges: obstruction of justice, overt acts in violation of the law, conspiracy to defraud the United States government. I do not recognize anything he states.
Howell came to the prosecutors with information that he considered potentially criminal involving other people, suspicious activity. When they looked at it, they realized there were some names of people that they wanted to get for whatever reason. They may have thought they were serious criminals, but for whatever reason, Howell potentially had information against these other people, big fish. And the next thing Howell knew, they had charged him, even though he had voluntarily come to them. They went to great lengths to make sure he did not get a bond because they wanted him to give information against these other people. He sat down and was debriefed on numerous occasions without even having his lawyer present and said, look, this is what I know, which was not enough. Had Howell said to them, I'm convinced of this just from reading this, had Howell said to them, I will tell you whatever you want to know, he would never have gone to jail.
So they took us in chains and then transported us to Raleigh, North Carolina, which is the Eastern District, which had no more jurisdiction in this case than a foreign country.
He had no say in that. Well, he has a constitutional right, we all do, to be tried in the venue where we're alleged to have committed a crime. So that was very unusual. His wife was then charged, and he was thrown into terrible local lockup.
Violent surroundings, one bad word, one bad look can go off the beam and you're dead. Overcrowded always, every room's filled, every bed's filled, and then they put people on the floors.
And he was thrown in jail with rapists and pedophiles and murderers for a lengthy period of time. They were successful in denying him bond. And that, I think, is a not uncommon process to break people, to get them to become cooperating witnesses.
I ended up getting along with them. You know, I kept to myself a lot and tried to help some people with their legal work. And I guess I became fairly important to some of them, so it seemed like everybody watched my back. I didn't know why people kept coming up to me and asking me to help them with their cases. And finally this very nice young black man came up and he said, will you help me with my case? And I said, well, why are you asking me? And he said, you're a white guy with glasses. He said, you got to know something about the law. And then I read his paperwork and I was so shocked by what I saw, the sloppiness of the government charges. I said, well, when did your lawyer come to see me? He said, I had never seen my lawyer. He said, he never shows up. I noticed after I helped that young man, and I got one guy completely released from prison, so it was on after that. And I said, I can do this. So I started studying law and learning what I could, and it would end up some nights the table would be rotating, and every little bit there'd be a new guy sitting on the other side wanting me to read his case. And I always tried to only help those that deserved the help, that were there wrongfully, had not committed a crime, or were unrepresented. Their attorneys wouldn't do anything for them. But unfortunately, that was about a third of the cases. And that should shock America.
Very first day in Beckley, I arrived on Valentine's Day 2011. My main concern, of course, was not becoming someone's Valentine that night. I mean, that was really, at that point, all I could think of. And so I walk into the library, and that's where I first met Hal. There's Hal and about 4 other guys in there. And that was within 5 hours of my arrival at Beckley. And basically, I spent the next year and a half in the library with Hal and with these other guys. Although I don't think anyone spent more time in the library than Hal. And Hal, I mean, I saw it happen many times. I mean, he probably was responsible for thousands of days of reductions in sentences. I mean, he gave guys back years of their lives. The details of his case became really known to me, and it was so unbelievable that the really basic fairness issues of the way the justice system is supposed to work were just simply thrown out the window, and it cost him everything.
About January 16th or 17th of 2007, I got a letter from my wife, and she said, I can't survive this any longer, so here's what I want you to do for our children. I want them to get a college education. I want them to keep in touch with my family. It was basically a farewell letter. And then I find out from a guard who was in her pod 2 floors below. Lady came to my cell one night and said, you need to do what you got to do to get your wife out of here. She's dying. So they hauled her out of here thinking she was dead the other night. Says, you do what you've got to do. The next day is when I called the U.S. Attorney's Office and said, come over here with an agreement. They were there shortly thereafter, and they were willing to trade a hostage for a plea of guilt.
And finally, they said, look, if you plead guilty, we'll let your wife go. And he did.
I didn't even read it. We had done nothing wrong. In fact, they admitted that. They said, we know you didn't do anything wrong. We're just, we made all this up basically to hold you so you can be a witness against these people. I was devastated. I thought, well, this is the end. Lost my wife, lost my family, lost everything, and I'm going away from prison for 7 years for a non-existent crime. My children, I'll never be able to recoup that 7 years, and that's the worst thing. The growing up when they needed me most, I was not here for them, and that's a burden I'll carry. I had a couple of opportunities to lie for the federal government, and they said they'd let me go, but I wake up in this skin every morning, and I'm not gonna lie for them or against them. And so I had to do every day of the sentence, not because I committed a crime, but because I wouldn't lie. Unlike most of the people the federal government seems to attack, I did have an education. I did have the advantages. I had exposure, and I was able to tell it. And that's really the only difference between me and them. There were people that I had never given the time of day, and you realize that everybody's a human being. That year in solitary, all I had to do was ask hour upon hour, why me? Why me? And I got a big booming answer one day, and wasn't any flash in the sky, but I knew, and the answer was, you're supposed to do something about it. So I will keep this fight going until I feel like I have done something about it.
Do you feel like this fight has an end?
I don't know, but until I get a different message, I'm going to keep on swinging.